So the first thing I want to say about relationship development and deterioration is that not every relationship is going to follow these steps. Obviously, some relationships don't deteriorate. Some people stay married for a very long time, so they don't actually experience that. Or even in the process of coming together or deteriorating, some of the steps are skipped. So I think this is just an overview or an idea about how relationships can be developed and put together. So let's take a look at this idea, and the basic things we're going to look at first is how relationships come together and then how relationships come apart. So coming together is going to look at this phases of initiation, experimenting, intensifying, integrating, and bonding. So in looking at the first step, which was initiating, the first thing that you're going to do is this is going to be related to a person that maybe you just met or noticed. So this might be somebody maybe you noticed in class, or maybe somebody that you see out, at an event or something. So you're going to notice that person, and they're going to catch your eye, and so you're going to notice that one. And then you want to look at available visual information. So things like how attractive they are physically, or their body type, or their age, or maybe ethnicity or gender, clothing, posture. You're going to look at all those elements and determine if you find this person to be attractive to you. And then in this area, you're more likely to be concerned with presenting yourself as in a positive way. So making sure that you're coming across in a way that's going to be attractive to the other person. So we go from initiating into experimenting, and in this level, we're going to look at more at exchanging of information. So information that's things like, what's your major or where you grew up, like general demographic stuff. And then you might have a little bit of small talk, things like, that aren't really important, but you feel kind of safe to discuss with another person. And this is more like a casual dating phase. So maybe when you're connecting with a person. Now, I think just to mention, I think it depends on your intention in going out. Is for some people, it's it's a hookup. They're going to just find somebody, and it's really not meant to be something more. I think when we're looking at this is more of a situation where maybe you want to have a relationship that's a little bit more long-term. And we're looking at this particular phase. I look at Steve Harvey came out with a book, and he talks about relationships. And he says, hey, if you're looking at having a relationship with a person over a long period of time, and you start throwing sex into the relationship, that kind of confounds things, and sometimes you're not thinking as clearly. So it can be beneficial to hang out here for a while. He's actually suggesting, 90 days, 60, 90 days, and that might be a lot for people to hang out there for a long period of time, but it does give you more of an opportunity to get to know a person, and if you're really thinking about being in relationship with them for a longer period of time, it might be beneficial to make sure that you spend some time here where you're really getting to know the person, rather than jumping into the physical part, where sometimes things get confounded and a little bit confusing, and you get kind of caught up in the physical part of the relationship rather than being present for communication and how you're interacting with that person. So that kind of steps into the intensifying stage, where you feel those strong feelings of attraction, and you start revealing more intimate information and kind of giving life goals and dreams and secrets, and using a little bit more of the we language. And then, having more of an expression of commitment and physical expressions of affection, like holding hands and kissing and those kinds of things, where you're showing that your relationship is becoming more connected. I think that idea of showing the we language is a powerful one, because there's almost an unconscious part that seems to happen with that, where a person will oftentimes just sort of shift that, and then the relationship stops being two individuals and becomes a duo. So that's something to kind of pay attention to, maybe when you're in a relationship with someone, and say, hey, I wonder, how they're feeling with this relationship. And if you start noticing them using we language, that would be a good indication for you. And also, if you want to take the relationship to the next level, maybe you start using that. I think there's some subconscious pieces that go along with that, that if someone starts to hear that kind of language in what they're saying, they might, be more involved in the process, know that the relationship is moving along there as well. Integrating, now this is where the sexual activity has a tendency to show up, but I think for some people it shows up a little bit sooner in the process. So that would be something to notice. Maybe this is a good idea to have it, again, sitting a little bit further down the process, but it kind of, again, depends on what your intention is. If this is meant to be a longer term relationship, you might take your time. If you're just looking for, we'll just call it a booty call, then that might be then it doesn't matter. Then it's not as important to take your time with the beginning of the relationship. And you start cultivating things together, like you talk about your favorite song. This is our song. This is the song that was playing when we met. Or having a favorite restaurant, a place that you go that's kind of meant for the two of you. And then being treated as a couple by your friends and the people that know you. They begin to treat you as a couple, or oftentimes you begin treating yourself like a couple. So that leads itself, this idea of integrating into the idea of bonding. And oftentimes this happens with more of a public ritual. So some of them could be institutionalized, where you might enter into marriage, or you might start to follow specific customs or laws that relate to either government or religion. So we have those elements of kind of coming together and creating that bond. I think at this stage, oftentimes, as you are going through and you're starting to create these things, you're creating your own rules and your own communication ideas and how things are supposed to look as you're experiencing those elements. So that's kind of the coming together, and sometimes people will hang out there. I mean, they will be bonded. I mean, I think my grandparents were married for over 50 years. I have another friend that recently celebrated a 50-year anniversary with her husband. I mean, they're very connected to each other. Unfortunately, a lot of times when people are really that close, when somebody passes away, which oftentimes happens, when they've been together for quite some time, I know they will oftentimes pass away relatively quickly to each other, because they kind of don't know how to live without each other. Many times they've done that at a really young age, and they've connected to each other. And so if you know somebody that's in that situation, it's really smart to make sure that they have, distractions and other reasons for being here, and so that they don't kind of get caught up in that, and help them see, other ways of doing life. Because, if that's all they've experienced, then that's what they know. And that's tough. It's tough losing a mate that you've had with you for a really, really long time. So some of us have experienced the coming apart of a relationship. I know I have experienced the coming apart of a relationship. And again, I can say that mine didn't follow these steps in necessarily the same way. There were pieces that were there. I don't think I did the terminating piece that they have at the end. So let's take a look at those. So they talk about differentiating, circumscribing, stagnating, avoiding, and terminating. So I can say I didn't necessarily follow them exactly the way that they're listed here, but I think for many people's relationships, there's some elements or some degree of these that kind of follow along in the relationship. So the first one is differentiating, and it's focusing on, you start to focus on the differences. So I think initially when we look back, we can see that we were looking for things that allowed us to be common. I mean, what do we share in common? Ideas and philosophies and goals and what do we share in common. And then, there starts to be some bickering and some arguments, the right word. And then contrasting viewpoints. So we start to actually look for things that make us be different rather than looking for the things that cause or create commonality between us. So that differentiating leads to this idea of circumscribing. And, if we kind of got to the point now where we've noticed all these differences between us and them, then you might start doing things like ignoring that person or spending less time with them. Maybe you're more careful about the information that you're exchanging, because, a lot of times when you've entered a relationship, maybe you've given some more detailed information about who you are and shared more intimate information about who you are. And now as you're going through this relationship, it's kind of coming apart. That doesn't feel safe anymore. So you kind of figure out what feels safe for you. You talk about topics that maybe you won't have conflict around so that you don't have to enter into another argument with the person. Once you go to circumscribing, then the next step in that would be stagnation, and stagnating relates to no safe topics. So we kind of got to the point where we don't really have a safety zone. We don't really have a place where we feel good. Maybe you feel trapped or you feel resigned to the situation, and realizing that, maybe it's not going to be able to go forward. A lot of times the feelings have just changed. The day you don't feel what you felt before. So that doesn't make it pleasant for you anymore. Another one would be, the next step would be avoiding. And that would be when you decide that you no longer want to be around each other. So you start to create physical distance between you and the other person. And you're no longer in maybe in the same space. Now this becomes interesting if you live together. So, whether you start to, maybe create situations where you're not going to be home at night, or you create other obligations, you find ways to be in different rooms. I think it's harder when you live together for sure, because you really, avoiding just becomes more complicated. But I think that this oftentimes happens. You just stop wanting to be around each other. And this idea of terminating, this discussing the relationship and kind of going back over it and saying, let's see who we were in the past, present, future, and maybe talk about how your relationship was. Maybe it's accusing the other person or arguing with them, or feeling sad, feeling sad about what happened with the relationship. And then this idea of just not having the same intimacy between you that you had before. And then, if there are oftentimes, physical relationships, sometimes people will keep coming back to each other. I know I've been in a relationship for 25 years or something with the same person over and over again. So I just keep bouncing back to the same person. I'm not doing that anymore. But, there was that element of continuing to try something that really wasn't going to work. And you'd think we'd figure out after that long, but apparently for me, I'm a little slow. So I figured it out now. And terminating, how do you handle it? So, if you kind of have empathy, you have empathy for yourself, have empathy for them, kind of take, maybe a step back perspective-wise, and, kind of keep in mind, that maybe this was something that was important to you during that period of time, but now that's over. And it is normal to experience some grief, so don't be surprised if you have that. Just allow yourself to maybe feel that and grieve that and let it go, and know that there's kind of a process that happens with that. I think it's a good idea to give yourself a little time before you enter into another relationship to finish off the previous one before you move on to the next one. It seems like when grieving relationships as well as grieving someone that's passed away, that if you don't kind of move through it and allow yourself to experience what it means to grieve and what it means to let go of that sometimes you'll pull extra stuff back in that maybe you didn't want to, and then it'll end up being a little bit more complicated. And then you end up, like when the next one breaks up, or you end up dragging some of the stuff from the previous relationship into the next one, or the next time someone passes away, you end up grieving for 2 relationships, and then you try to get away from that. So I think it's better to just move through it and maybe handle that one and finish it and do some healing around it before you move to the next one. But that's personal opinion. And then use your communication skills to minimize the damage. So you don't have to have the person feel bad. I think sometimes when the relationships don't end well, there's a part of us that maybe just wants to make them hurt a little bit, and I get that. But if you use your communication skills, maybe you can minimize the amount of damage that you have going forward. All right, there you go. That's coming together and coming apart of a relationship.